なりおしまい。
And welcome back, Dragon Ballers, to Get the Mic, the only show where your host on the left, Owl,
and your host on the right, Brock,
dissect fiction for its mythological significance. Now, in this episode, as usual, we're talking about Dragon Ball, specifically episode 70. We are the Five Warriors. Not the best name for it, but
we could go with Attack, We Five Fighters.
They're both equally bad for what the episode is. It should be called Dracula Man.
Just Dracula Man.
It should really just be called Dracula Man. Before we get into the episode, any housekeeping stuff? I don't think we really have too much. Just want to remind everyone to like and subscribe. And as far as upload schedule, we have changed it slightly. Review to the sidebar if you would like to figure out our new schedule. Pretty much Mondays and Thursdays for YouTube, and Tuesdays and Fridays for Rumble. So, if you're trying to catch us live, or if you want to see the videos as they premiere, follow that schedule. Usually in the afternoon around, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock.
Eastern
time. So, be on the lookout for that. I think we're ready to get started. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into We Are the Five Warriors. Now, if you remember, Brock, we just got to the palace of Baba, and Goku and his friends have arrived there. They're going to try and fight the five fighters to get the ancestral mother to reveal the value that they cannot find.
Right, they need someone to map out where it is and where they need to go.
And so for that, they must endure these tests of the five fighters, right?
And there just happens to be 5 of them there.
Interesting. So on the platform outside, Puar and Upa say that they would probably be better just watching instead of fighting, which is interesting that they say that. Because I think even still they're kind of in the mindset of, oh, this is the Tenkaichi tournament. It's like, no, this is nothing like the tournament. And people who say this is like a tournament arc, it's like, this is not really a tournament arc.
Right, and one of our characters in this episode tries to say that themselves.
Goku tells Baba that it'll be just the 3 of them, Krillin, Yamcha, and Goku, against her 5 fighters. Full of confidence, Krillin volunteers to challenge the first fighter. Baba calls out to Dracula Man, and a bat flies out of the building behind her. That building that I mentioned in the last episode, which is really the interstitial, the gateway into the underworld.
It's in the center of the cross.
And what comes out of it but a bat? And it transforms into a pale vampire dressed as a kickboxer. Dracula Man begins dancing around the arena, and Baba begins the match. When Krillin attempts to attack Dracula Man, he says that he isn't finished with his dance. He doesn't say anything in the English dub. A lot of, and I'll go ahead and say this now, the English dub sucks at
Yeah,
Dracula Man. They chose some of the worst decisions possible to disintegrate the spirit of Dracula Man. Poor Dracula Man.
he was robbed.
I just feel bad for him. Anyways, so he does say that. He tells Krillin he's not finished dancing, which surprises Krillin, and then Dracula Man attacks Krillin as his guard is down. Krillin tells Dracula Man that those tactics won't work on him. So instead, the vampire turns into a bat and begins flying around Krillin, easily avoiding his attacks and tiring him out in the process, I would say. So what do we want to go ahead and say here? First of all, Dracula Man, his design, all that.
Before we get too deep into Dracula Man, I want to point out one thing about the arena that they're in,
Oh, okay, yeah.
because it looks like the Dragon Radar, right? It's the circle and it's got the grid on it, and it looks exactly like the Dragon Radar.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever Krillin steps into the ring, he says that it's just like being back at the Tenkaichi tournament.
Except it's not. It's not angular. It's not angular in the way that it's a hierarchy, right?
Right. And so he
It's a
doesn't
circular,
recognize that
yeah.
this is a different arena that he's stepping into. And it's funny, like whenever he says that, you get a little sound clip there and it plays like the sound of the crowd. And
Yeah.
that's to say what Krillin thinks of competing in a, I don't want to say competing, but pitting your spirit against someone else's spirit. He still thinks of it as something that is more of an outward thing, more of a social thing, something that fills your ego, right? Something that has to do with your identity rather than yourself. And
Okay.
so yeah,
Interesting.
so he steps into this arena, which is really more of a spiritual arena that has to do with mapping the good in the world, and thinks that he's just going to be contending on that pure my strength will get me there sort of expression, right? Whereas that's because he hasn't learned any of this that
Well,
Goku's learned, right?
not just. I don't want to say pure expression of strength because I think that's a little too imprecise. But let's say his willingness to submit himself to the hierarchy,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
His respect for the ancestral father. Those things will get him through this challenge.
Right. Yeah, it's better to be specific in that because of the fight that's coming at him, right?
Hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about
Now we can get to
Dracula
Dracula
Man.
Man.
Because he comes in as a bat, right? He flies down, and then we see that he is a vampire, and he's a kickboxer, I think, because he's kind of like a leaping vampire in a sense, right? He's got these for some reason, he's a because he could have just been a vampire, right? Just like a meh. But
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
he's a
Yeah.
vampire fighter, like a kickboxer. So I think it's
Yeah.
kind of it's jokey in that sense, right?
It's to fit, I think, the integration of how he's being presented, right? It is the vampire as such if he was in this arena. And
Hmm.
I also want to mention too, um, he comes out as a bat. Vampires, though, are undead, right? And so we already see in the very first fighter that Baba sends out is shows her power over the undead, over death, right?
Right.
And so, and what else do we know about vampires? I
They're
know
the
you
living
just read a
dead.
long thing about it, right?
There's a lot to vampires. I'm going to be kind of coming off the dome on this one just because there's too much to read about the archetypes of vampires and all the different aspects of what they can represent. I want to try to narrow it down into what he's doing, specifically his actions that he takes, and show how that manifests the archetype,
Well,
rather.
Dracula himself, like the origin of the vampire myth, right,
Right.
is that the and it comes from somewhat from that story of Vlad the Impaler, right? It comes from that time where things were done so inhumanely, let's say, that it turned that person into a monster to other people. And the rumors
It's a
spread
limit
and that
story, right? Like you
right.
become a monster as such by being a monster.
Right. And so that unholiness too, as well as because Vlad was a very religious, I don't even know if I want to say religious because he himself wasn't personally, let's say, religious, but he adopted a religion for that area so that he could hold the line against the Muslim advance, right? And he was so brutal against the Muslim advance, and that's kind of where those stories came from. And that area, that Transylvanian area, Romanian area, is where he was,
Right.
right? And so all that taken into account, right? It is the perversion of the good for wicked means. That's why he's a fighter, because he's showing that that fighting spirit can be inhabited by unholy spirits.
Right. I think that's it. It is, how would I say, it's the language that Dragon Ball speaks, right? As well. So it shows that if he's going to contend with Krillin on the terms that Krillin contends with people, then this is, this is how he is, right? So it's leveling that out and keeping it contextually sound for the way that our heroes interact with it in the first
But not
place.
only that, what I'm saying is like that spirit of
Yeah.
the unholiness being cloaked in a facade of something holy, which is fighting in this instance. Fighting in this is the contention of one spirit against another, and that process is seen as divine in the show. That divinity is being worn outwardly by him, right? And even think about Dracula and vampire iconography. It's gothic, right?
Right.
It has that element of beauty in it. And so here we're taking that element
Sure.
of
It's the
beauty and
beauty and
fighting,
movement, right?
and we're translating that from having the Dracula or a vampire and inhabit
I
that
see.
that
Yeah, the
space.
connection to the beauty makes sense to me because it's sort of like,
And that's why he dances first
yeah.
thing as well.
Well, that's one reason that he dances. I think another aspect of why he dances is to taunt and upset Krillin and to get his blood to boil, so to speak. Because what he's doing in this fight, as he comes at Krillin, is he's essentially playing with him, right? And that it's it is that malevolent expression in that sense because Krillin describes it like he's going into the Tenkaichi tournament, but he's being played with as sort of prey,
Well,
right? And
let's
that's
think
how a
about
vampire
too.
is.
Let's think about too. The vampire's instantiation is a spirit of death or undeath, right? Death cannot be defeated by um what Krillin is trying to do, which is a direct confrontational assault, right?
Hmm.
It's death, and the reality of death is not negated by the acknowledgement of death. And even here, Krillin can't even get a grasp on what that means. And so he misses every time, right? And so the reason that Fang or not Fangs, Dracula Man is so evasive to him is because death is an amorphous and a very challenging problem that Krillin hasn't forthrightly set up to deal with already. Like Goku might be able to take on this challenge because he's dealt with that in a way already with Bora.
Oh yeah, I would say he definitely can.
But yeah, I mean, he definitely would be able to. But Krillin has not done that. Like
Well, he
Roshi
wasn't
hasn't done
there
anything
whenever
like
they
that.
went down into the unknown before, right? And this is a bit where the Jungian archetype of the vampire sort of makes sense because the vampire in more popular culture media seems to be a sort of a how would you say, like a conduit, or not even a conduit, but almost like a door from adolescence into adulthood, and it has to do with the integration of the knowledge of death and also the wisdom of what you do about the
What
reality of death,
right?
right?
What is the answer to that problem? Is it uh is the answer to that problem trying to trying to what do I want to say? Trying to deflate the idea of death to where it doesn't matter? No, because it still does matter. Death is a part of that being. It's part of the structure of being. And so without that idea that that is part of it, you can't incorporate that into your map, and so you're not going to be able to pin it down, which is what Krillin's not able to do. And so what do vampires do as well? They suck blood, right? Are we there yet? No, let's get there. All
Sure.
right. So let's go there. So the bat fangs of the
Fangs the Dracula.
Dracula the Fangs Man is flying around Krillin's head as Um, he flies higher and then transforms into a vampire as he's behind Krillin and plummets down, landing on him. He sinks his teeth into Krillin's head and starts drinking his blood. Krillin struggles to shake him off before jumping and flipping over, landing back down on his own head. Disoriented from the blood loss, Krillin begins to stagger, and Dracula Man says he loves the taste of pipsqueak blood. When Krillin becomes angry, blood begins to shoot out of the holes in his head. Yamcha reminds him to remain calm so that he doesn't lose any more blood. But Goku tells him that it looks like he has hair now, making the situation worse. Dracula Man rushes in as Krillin sways back and forth and easily kicks him out of the ring.
Right.
So we were just getting to that,
Mhm.
which is why I wanted to switch clips. So vampires, they suck blood, right? They have to they cannot subsist on their own existence, right? There's not enough meaning in their life to substantiate their existence. And so they have to feed on other people. And I think the reason that he likes pipsqueak blood, right, is it's full of that potential, right? Krillin is
Right,
full
that's
of that
that
potential.
sort of virgin blood motif, right? Which is like it's the sweetest because it has the most potential in it, right? And
Mhm.
also that we had just kind of talked about Krillin saw Upa and was like, "Oh, you must be a girl, right?" Because there's that the beauty in potential, right? And so the pipsqueak blood that is so attractive to him, right, is something that could be a weakness to him.
Right, and I also briefly wanna mention here the subsistence that Dracula Man is getting. He's feeding off of that in this Dragon Ball context, right? He's feeding off of that loss of their spirit, their will to fight, right? And that's what Krillin loses here because he loses so much blood, right? He can no longer fight. And so he's kind of debased that idea for Krillin now, right? As a creature who used his own weaknesses against him, right? He's kind of made it to where Krillin is resentful of the fact that he lost, and we see that later on.
Right. Well, there's two aspects of his attack here too, right? So the main thing is that, he drinks a lot of his blood and it weakens his spirits or his resolve, you could say, to be able to continue contending with a spirit that is doing what it's doing. But then his outrage to it, his anger towards being treated that way, right, is what weakens him to the point that he can then be kicked out of the ring, right? And so Yamcha reminds him, he says, you need to calm yourself, otherwise you're going to lose too much of it, and then you won't be able to fight. And then Goku, being Goku, points out sort of his nakedness, his lack of hair, right? And that upsets him enough so that he turns blue, right?
And then he feigns, basically.
Basically faints.
Yeah.
And it's a twofold sort of thing. So I want to, before I get too deep into that, I want to kind of go back and mention that two times now we've seen Krillin where he sees a threat from above and he wants to run away from it, right? He assumes that it's malevolent toward him and he runs away, right? The funny thing about this fight is that he comes into the fight thinking that it's a fair fight, right? And then the bat, which is like a dark bird, right? It's an unholy bird, flies down to him, right? And it looks down on him as a spirit because it knows that he has not integrated it and is playing with him like like food, like prey, right? And Krillin, being egotistical in the way that he is and concerned with his image, it angers him, and he that anger actually weakens him even further. So what Dracula does is he makes the holes in his head, right? Where then his hard-headedness or his ego actually can be a weakness used against
Well,
him, right?
let's put it this way, because
And I
I
think that's
think
why he bites his head, right?
we can be a little more terse here, and I do like that you brought that up. So, what is it exactly that's happening when Dracula Man bites Krillin's head? Is that Krillin's interface with death, with the idea of death, is such that he his reaction, no, sorry, not his reaction, is such that it exposes his vulnerabilities the ways that his spirit is disintegrated. And so and that's exactly it, that fear of death. He tries to actually run from the vampire when he's coming at him, right? Instead of
Right.
trying to fight him. And it's that elevated spirit that he's afraid of. And we've established that I think pretty well.
Right. His
And
inability
so
to integrate that higher
his
spirit is such
his
a weakness, right?
his weakness there, right, is exposed by what happened, and so he's angry at his weakness. And is that the proper method to elevate one's spirit? No. Getting angry at the weaknesses that a person has isn't going to resolve them. So that's one thing. And then the second thing you already pointed out, Goku, pointing out maybe not his nakedness so much as it is,
He points out that he's been made a fool of essentially,
yeah,
right? Because he's been
that's
played
what I'll
with
say.
like
Yeah.
food,
So
and
I guess
so
nakedness in a way.
in a sense, but I like that it does that because he is blind to the malevolent higher spirit that would come down on him until it's too late. And so his paranoia did not serve him in the end.
Right. It only served to backfire.
Exactly.
So he gets knocked out of the ring. He gets knocked into the water and he receives a blood transfusion and is revived, um, so that he cannot die. Let's say,
Right. Because Baba tells him during the fight, you'll lose too much blood and you'll die.
yeah, and that is a very real possibility because that's seriously the thing that distinguishes Tenkaichi from this is like this is real. This is a match, could be a match to the death. And as we see as it goes on, the stakes are gonna be raised and raised and raised. Nothing like the Tenkaichi, right? Where it is a competition between spirits to see who is at the top of the hierarchy. Where this is not trying to test top of the hierarchy at all. So let's go ahead and continue. The pink ghost administers a blood transfusion for Krillin, reviving him like we said, and Krillin tells Goku that he lost because Goku said things he didn't need to say. That's what I mean. That
Right.
resentfulness, right, has grown in him, and he's still blind to his weakness.
Right. He says, I lost because you pointed my weakness out, which means nothing to Goku.
Right. The gang formulates a plan to fight Dracula Man, and Baba agrees to let Upa and Puar fight together. Back at Kame House, Bulma asks if Baba can be trusted, and Roshi reveals that she's been telling fortunes for over 500 years. It'll be no problem for her to find the ball. When Bulma asks why they couldn't use her all along instead of the radar, he simply says that she has an attitude problem. Back in the ring, Dracula Man rushes at Upa, but at the last second, Upa blows in his face, revealing he had just eaten garlic. Upa clings to him, repeatedly assaulting him with his breath. Dracula Man transforms back into a bat, deciding to attack Puar instead. But at the last second, Puar transforms into a porcupine, causing damage to Dracula Man's mouth. When he finally comes back to his senses, Upa stands over him, T-posing. Terrified of the cross, Dracula Man flees in terror, only to be smacked down into the lake when Puar transforms into a giant hamburger helper hand. So there's a lot to get to here.
Right.
Firstly, let's just start at the beginning here. Um, I suppose we'll get into Upa and Puar in a minute. We already kind of talked about Krillin, so let's go ahead and start with this Roshi part here, where Roshi reveals she's been telling fortunes for 500 years. Um, it hasn't been revealed quite the relationship between Roshi and Baba, but we now know they're both old. Like they're both really old, right?
Very old. Now we have a timeline, right? Because 800 years ago is Korin being established as a land, right, by Korin. And then we have 500 years now. Fortunes have been being told by Baba, and 300 years ago, Roshi climbed Korin Tower.
Mm-hmm. So all of that is in order. We've also seen how old Roshi was at the time.
Pretty young.
Pretty young, probably in his 30s, 20s. Who knows? So we also see Bulma ask why they couldn't just use her all along, and I think it's to say that the spirit which enables the logos to go forward, the maternal spirit, is not something that can be used at a whim. It needs to be something that has to be let's say, serendipitous with the events of the universe.
Well, she's basically saying, "Why can't someone just always have a dark night of the soul?" And Roshi's like, it's not that easy, right? Like, this is a process. This is a personal transformational process that he sent Goku to go into, right? And not
Right.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
Goku,
Yeah.
but the five of them. And Bulma doesn't understand because she's able to do it, right? She's able to find it. She thinks, well, I mean, what's the
Well,
big
because
deal?
that's her power, right? That's part of her power, and that's why she is the archetypal female, right? She has
Right.
received this inherited magical gift, which is a transformation from what she received from her father, right? Which capsules, technology, all of that. But Dr. Brief didn't make the Dragon Radar. Bulma made the Dragon Radar.
Exactly. Right.
And it's that gift of that ancestral mother that she has that allows her to do it. And so yeah, she doesn't understand why.
That this is the source.
Yeah, she doesn't understand yet, but she is she, we'll get there.
Yeah.
So, right, she didn't understand that, but Roshi's saying she has an attitude problem. I'm curious um
It's funny how he
what are we
says
saying
it
there?
because he's like, "Oh, well, the thing is she's kind of got an attitude problem." And then in the English he's like, she's a strict businesswoman or something like that." And it shows his sunglasses and there's a little gleam in them, right? And I think that's to say that you don't um one does not simply challenge being itself, like the
The
nature
nature
of the
of
world,
being.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
get that.
and so he's like, "Yeah, I've downplayed this. It is not a simple ask, right? To get this information because this is the type of wisdom that you have to pay for." But he knows that Goku's good enough because he's climbed the tower that he'll be able to pay what he needs to pay.
And of course, he knows that his other students will be able to grow in the process as well by experiencing the encountering of the unknown.
Exactly.
So he is fine with it. And he seemed pretty chill with this whole he's been pretty chill these last couple episodes. Really the most chill out of anyone, I would say,
Everyone's always worrying, and Roshi's just kind of like, "Oh, yeah."
which is significant to note because it's going to be in a huge contrast to what happens later. So back in the ring, Dracula Man rushes at Upa, like we said. And this time it seems that that conference they had about sending out Puar and Upa together has paid off. Upa has been chowing down on garlic. We've seen him in the background just eating garlic the whole time so that when Dracula comes forth, he can blow that in his face. Now, garlic and vampires. Why? Why do you think that is?
So there's a lot of different reasons for it. Part of it has to do with culturally people assigning different illnesses to vampirism that make you much more sensitive in your smell. And garlic is irritating to you whenever you're that sensitive. Like if you have rabies, or I think it's called porphyria or something. So that's one, right? The other thing is that in religious practice, garlic has been, because it's a blood thinner apparently, um it's been thought of as to purify your blood, right? It's a purifying agent. And the idea being that a vampire being an impure spirit, right,
Yeah, I was gonna
can
say
be guarded
it's a
by,
cleansing thing because garlic also is has a lot of health benefits to you, right?
right.
And so it's like it's beneficial to life and antithetical to death, right? And I think that's one of the reasons
Well,
why.
that's why they put they put garlic in they used to put garlic in the mouth of a corpse whenever it was buried so that it wouldn't arise again, right?
Hmm.
But the breath is a big part of it though, because garlic has a really strong pungent smell on your breath. So what Upa does here is he attacks Devilman with his breath, right?
Well,
With
not
breath
just with
being
the breath,
spirit.
but it's Upa that
Hmm.
particularly has to do it, right?
Yeah,
It's
because
it's
he's
what
pure.
well, not only that, but what has he done with Goku's spirit, right? His interactions with Goku have really refined Goku's spirit as well. It's been a let's say meaning and life-giving experience. And so here Upa is using that the breath of creation, right, to create this cleansing cloud
Right.
to get rid of the evil spirit.
And that's why immediately what we learn is that the ones who thought they weren't here to fight are the ones who were best equipped to fight on this battleground, right? And so we put Upa out here, who is pure in spirit, who um who we see manifest good uh through their being, right? And as you had said, like has brought out more good in Goku. That purity then he uses a breath attack, right? And he
Mm-hmm.
grabs onto him the same way that he was grabbed onto Krillin, right? So we had a shot of Krillin running back and forth
And
trying to get
now
him
we
off.
have
But
Dracula
now
Man
Dracula
running
Man
back and
can't
forth.
get
Yeah.
Upa off of him as he repeatedly keeps breathing on him until he has to run away.
So
And
he
so
transforms into a bat, right? He's like, okay, I'll elevate my spirit beyond
it's
this
like, you're just a kid. I'll get away
cleansing.
from you.
Yeah. And so he decides to attack Puar instead, right? He sees the vulnerability inherent in Puar's physical features and not understanding Puar's adoption of the chaotic sense that comes together with Upa's orderliness, right? That kind of makes that a pair. He's actually not hurt by Puar. He's hurt by Upa. He's not hurt by Puar. He hurts himself, right? And that's to say that his interaction with the unknown that he doesn't understand also hurts him the same way that it hurt Krillin
Yeah.
whenever he landed on his
Well,
head.
nature is red in tooth and claw, right?
Definitely,
And
yeah.
it doesn't just cut one way for him. So whenever he goes to engage on this level, he underestimates the level of spirit that Puar represents. And because similar to the way that Bulma can invent things, Puar can shapeshift and change and manifest something, right? And so doesn't recognize the potential, only sees Puar as prey, right? And that's sort of to do with the blindness of the vampire, right? Which is the last thing that I want to say about the vampire archetype is that vampires turn away from the sun and they enter into an embrace with the moon, right? And so he's blind to
Well, normally, and this is not in this example, but they
right.
can't even be in the sun or else they
And I
disintegrate.
do want to point that out, but I want to say specifically it is the masculine aspects within Poir that she has from being tied to Yamcha so tightly that is what he is blind to and what hurts him, right? Because he has turned away from the sun, being a vampire, and is not conscious
Yeah, let's say
of that logos.
the integration of the logos and the feminine spirit, which is embodied here, that feminine spirit with Poir, right? And the adoption of betterment of potential is not something that vampires do because they only subsist on the spirit of others.
Right.
Mhm.
And so the sun is out here though, right? So you could say, well, that doesn't really count because he's not that kind of vampire. I don't think that this space is bound by those rules.
There's like
They
no,
cross through a
there's light,
threshold
but
to
we
get
don't
here.
actually see the sun.
Well, they have to cross through a threshold to get here, right? There's a chaotic storm that's like a vortex. It's almost like they're in another dimension here. And so I don't really think that those rules even apply here.
Okay,
And so
fair.
this would be the only place because this
Almost
is
like
Baba's
limbo,
realm,
yeah.
right? Yeah, it is like limbo because it's right on that barrier between sky and water, right?
Yep.
And so this being a space that's controlled by Baba, she can manifest these spirits of unholiness here to be seen in the light, right?
Yeah. And so as he fails to attack Poir, he then comes back to his senses and sees Upa standing like this. And it has to be Upa that does it too, because Upa comes from that land where it is the center. He knows about this. This
He
is
knows about
one
the
thing that he
cross.
knows
Oh
about, right?
yeah.
And so he presents the cross, the axis of suffering, and the way forward, and let's say the way, the path, all that,
The
that the
voluntary
light,
acceptance of the suffering of being.
and that exactly is embodied in Jesus Christ, oh God. And so we see
Yeah.
those lines flash across as Dracula Man is overcome with that idea and cannot abide it. He can't be around it. It is the antithesis to which the unholy spirit as such can exist.
And
And
this is
so
the sun.
and this is the sun that he sees exactly.
Right.
And this is that idea that causes him to flee, and then Poir, using her shape-shifting abilities, knocks him into the water, and that's the end of Dracula Man.
Just smacks him down.
And that's to say too that after The spirit is broken.
He's impotent.
Chaos itself can form a downfall for that creature. And that's in fact, if one spirit is broken, the rate of success is going to be diminished. Especially because Dracula Man here um had such a good start, let's say, that now he's so weak that even Poir is able to just
Right,
smack him
because now he's
down.
been contended with on a spiritual level. And so it explains to us, the viewers, in the first fight, right, that this is the type of struggle that's going to happen here, and it's not going to be like the Tenkaichi tournament, where there are a lot of people who are just able um, to ascend that or not value, but the
The
competence
hierarchy.
hierarchy
Yeah.
through those specific things that it got them through before, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even just respect for the hierarchy itself isn't going to get you anywhere here.
Exactly,
That we're way beyond that.
because we're standing right on the precipice of the unknown.
Yeah. So, to contend with the unknown, you're already going to have to accept the hierarchies, right? So, Yamcha then, after Dracula Man is defeated, Yamcha steps up to challenge the second fighter, saying that he'll beat the last four fighters by himself. Good joke. When he tells Baba to send out his challenger, Baba says that he's already here. The gang looks around confused, and Upa points to a cockroach crawling next to Yamcha's foot. Goku asks if he has to fight a bug, but Baba reveals the fighter is known as Suke-san, the Invisible Man. When Baba starts the fight, Yamcha is struck from behind and taunted by the Invisible Man. In response, he begins to flail, attacking wildly. Goku wonders what he's doing by himself since he doesn't understand what invisible means. And Krillin devises a plan. He tells Goku to fly back to Kame House, retrieve Roshi and Bulma, and come back quickly. When Goku jumps on the Nimbus, though, Baba recognizes it and wonders who this boy could be. In the ring, Yamcha realizes that he needs to use his other senses and closes his eyes, listening for his opponent. That's kind of where we wrap up that episode. So, first thing here, we want to talk about Invisible, I think. Or is there something before Invisible?
I think that's straight into it, right?
Yeah. So, in the Invisible Man. So, the Invisible Man, much like a vampire and much like a mummy or a werewolf, are all monsters, right? Now, I will say the Invisible Man is probably the least monstrous of the fighters that we see, but he still is that, right? He he is the Invisible Man in the way that he is not detectable by sight, but not just sight like that, not just sight as in physical sight, but that he's invisible to the perception of being pinned down, let's say. He can't be pinned down because he's unknown. I'll go ahead and let you say. I'm trying to figure out how to word it.
I see what you're saying. There's this thing about the Invisible Man where, as long as you're trying to contend with him in the way that you would contend with anything that you could see with your actual ability to map the world, is going to fail, and that you have to be able to contend with it on a higher level. And so now the same test sort of comes to Yamcha, where he needs to contend with it on terms that he doesn't understand. Now, the terms that he doesn't understand, I think it's hinted at here at the beginning in the cockroach, right? So, and Baba telling him the fighter's already here. So, I think in a sense, what they're saying to Yamcha is, in this fight, you're going to need to contend with yourself, right? And that is true of all of these fights, but specifically as a meta fight for Yamcha here, he is being limited by his senses the way that he's using them, and he needs to be able to.
Especially since that's how he's used them before.
Exactly. And so he needs to overcome himself to be able to have this fight. Now, the reason that I say that the bug is relevant is, well, think of Jiminy Cricket and how he relates to a voice that you need to listen to know where you need to orient yourself to be able to succeed spiritually. And it's interesting here what the fighter's name is, which is Suke-san, right? So the only definitions I could find for suke are two things. Suke means transparent or invisible, right? So literal. But suke also means helper or aid or guide or assistant, right? And so, well, he is the invisible helping man that has, whenever she says that, also, she puts an emphasis on the san, right? So, as if he were to be revered, right? So, he is an invisible, guiding, helping man to be revered. And she also says he's already here. So, automatically, with that being tied into whenever I think it's Upa who sees the roach, Upa says he's going to be fighting a bug.
Mhm.
This
Or
isn't the
is it Goku? Or is it Upa?
I think Upa sees it, and then they all
Oh,
ask.
okay, okay.
But Upa's the first one that spots it. This isn't the only time that that motif of the bug, as that small voice, let's say, shows up. And so I think the bug is sort of like a wink and a nod to say, like, Yamcha's going to need to be able to listen, to actually listen, to find the truth, and that's spiritually what the fight I think is turning into now. The way that this fight goes and how it turns out, I haven't even watched that episode back yet. But my intuition from seeing the way that they're setting it up and the way that Bob is talking to him about it is that fundamentally that's what his struggle is going to be. And well, we'll see how he deals with that struggle, right?
Interesting. So, I want to add a couple things to that. Um, so the listening aspect, I like what you brought in there, because the cockroach too is an unknown entity as far as we know, right? It's something that hasn't been recognized by anyone yet, and so them pointing it out is like that acknowledgement, and so it is kind of a foreshadowing thing. I wouldn't necessarily say, and I guess what you're saying is it's kind of an allusion to Jiminy, but it's not
But it's not
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
literal, right?
But I also want to say that it is part of that rigidity, right? Because what has happened with Yamcha thus far in the story post season 1, right? He's really not confronted chaos. He's shunned away from meeting the, let's say, challenges presented by the archetypal feminine, right? He's continued to train in his own way for the Tenkaichi tournament, hasn't really taken on a master, right? Anything like that. And so all of these things have the common thread of him closing out his senses to the unknown. And those pathways have to be open, right? You have to be able to see all the way around your head to be able to absorb everything.
Right.
And so this really is a test of seeing if he can be receptive to the signals that the universe sends him in the unknown. And those are the things like
From the
having to
unknown,
listen,
right?
yeah, from the unknown. And so
And
we
interesting,
can't finish, but
yeah, but interesting also, you had mentioned the eyes all the way around his head, and he's standing on a big dragon radar right now as he's going through this fight, right? Which is to say,
yeah, it is
as a
Goku, isn't it?
team, they need to earn the ability to figure out where that nourishing wisdom is for them, right? And so this is the
And
challenge
in
for Yamcha.
particular for Yamcha, because this is kind of a test for Yamcha specifically, is it are it hmm, is Yamcha's spirit flexible enough to be able to adapt to the divine intervention that chaos can bring, or will it remain so rigid that it's unable to perceive the dangers around it? That's pretty much the stakes that we're at with Yamcha.
Right. It's a call to not
And remember,
stratify and become stagnant in your mode of being.
yes, and also remember that Yamcha is the potential masculine
He is the immature masculine.
still. And so this is kind of a test for that, right? Um, and people the way people change is very interesting in this show, but if we analog it to real life, right, that decision to be open or closed and integrated into your personality takes place during those formative years in late adolescence, right? In the big 5, those don't really change too much over time.
Right.
And so that openness, or opposite of that closedness, right, is really what Yamcha's contending with here.
needing to integrate it into his mode of being so that it can be elevated in the first place.
Right. And so at first fails, and Krillin actually devises a plan. I want to specifically say Krillin devises this plan. He tells Goku to go get Roshi and Bulma. We don't know what for yet, but this is Krillin's way of redeeming himself from the last, because he understands what kind of challenge it is. And so Krillin, he knows what happens at the end of the line with Roshi. And so he knows what will reveal this unknown to Yamcha.
Exactly.
But we don't know what it is yet, because we're going to have to wait till next
I do like
episode.
that revelation also comes on the heels of the puncturing in his head and how his inability to control his own emotions, right, made this eruption from his head, right? And so it's seen initially as something that has damaged him and that he can't learn from, but I think that it's actually created that openness for him in a sense, right? It has literally made
It's
an openness in his
physically
head.
opened him. No matter, it doesn't matter what he wants now. I mean, it's bared for all to see, and Goku points it out, right?
Yeah,
So the last thing I think we'll talk about is Baba recognizing the Nimbus.
right. In the English, she doesn't. She just says, "Oh, I have to ride around on this stupid crystal ball or
I
something like
hate the
that."
English,
But in the
the
Japanese,
dub in this season only.
yeah,
It's just terrible.
yeah, in the
This like 8
original,
episodes.
she says, "The Kinto-un, who could this boy be?"
Right. She recognizes, because she's the ancestral mother, that the path, the way, the Tao is divine. And Goku's command over the Tao makes her wonder the about Goku, because not many people, and especially the ones around her now, do not travel on the Tao, right?
Especially people who are rich in physical goods, right?
Yes. And that's specifically almost antithetical to it to begin with.
Right.
So those people she sees don't have it. And then the people that come to challenge her fighters that fail don't have it either. They're not on the Tao either. And so that, and we also know now too that she knows about the Kintoon, and we'll expand on that next episode.
Oh yeah.
Anything else?
I think that's it. I think
I
we
think we
covered
were
pretty
wrapped
much
up pretty
everything.
well. Okay, well, perfect. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe. Give us a like. We upload Mondays and Thursdays to YouTube, Tuesdays and Fridays to Rumble. Leave a comment as well if you disagreed with anything that we said, or if you agree and you just want to put a comment. We'd love to hear from you. I'm your host on the left, Owl,
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
and we hope you guys have a good night.
I'll never forget the day he showed up. And so, he told us that he was Goku. So we started calling him Goku Black. He looked down on all of us and said he was going to like you!